All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure One podcast. I know I say this way too much, but it has been a long time since I have done one of these things. So I'm glad to be back. I'm glad you're listening. And I'm glad to be back from an exciting adventure. I just recently got back from Idaho, up in the Rocky Mountains chasing Rocky Mountain elk. I say I'm excited to be back, but part of me wishes I was definitely still up there, still in the mountains, still chasing them. Because I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right up front, this is not a story of an elk that we called in on a string, textbook, and put an arrow through. Nope. It was very much a story of the pursuit of elk, and a great realization of how hard this really can be, and some of the cool just side adventures, side effects of going and chasing these wild critters in wild places. So I was up in Idaho, flew into Boise, rented a car, headed north quite a ways to where I had drawn my tag, and I met up with the crew from Hooked Hunting. So Hooked Hunting is a cool YouTube channel that does mostly Western hunts. They do some turkey stuff too, but in the fall, they do this whole series of Western hunts where they have different guests for different legs of the trip. So maybe they'll be in Montana chasing mule deer, and then Wyoming chasing pronghorn, and then Idaho chasing elk. They do some stuff with archery, with rifles, with muzzleloader. They do it all, man, and it's such a cool way that they put together their footage, because their mission is just to get people excited about hunting. I mean, hooked hunting, to get people hooked on hunting. That's their goal. To show just the camaraderie, the joy, the fellowship, the friendship, and yeah, the success, the meat, all the good things that come from these hunting adventures. So I was excited to be the guest with Hooked Hunting on this one leg of the hunt, and I was kind of there as an overlap. So there were two guys hunting who had gotten there before me, and then I kind of met up with them halfway through their hunt, and then finished out kind of as the solo hunter on the last leg of this hunt. So met up with them in Idaho. I took my rental, and I always rent through Enterprise, and this is not a plug for them too much, but I do appreciate their good service, and I always get an SUV with them, and a lot of times I've found, maybe it's not just Enterprise, maybe they all do this, but mid-size and small SUVs seem to be really hard to come by. A lot of times if you rent a compact SUV, you'll get there and they'll say, oh, there isn't a Forerunner, or sorry, a RAV4. There isn't a RAV4 or a, Jeep Renegade or some tiny SUV. We'll go ahead and upgrade you to a full-size SUV. That's happened to me multiple times, and I really appreciate it. Now, I wish I had a four-wheel drive going up in these mountains, but it all worked out even without that. So got in the truck, headed up, couple hours, went up the mountain in the dark, which was a little bit sketchy because I didn't know where I was going, but this is where I'm super thankful for onX Maps. I am not an affiliate with them. I don't have any partnership with them. I pay for onX Maps every single year. I pay for the nationwide platform. Just even if I do one of these hunts, it's worth it just to have it with me. To do I think they call it the Elite is the nationwide version. And man, it comes in handy because Ken had just left me an onX, basically he turned on the tracker to show me the trail up the hill and then a spot where they thought they were going to park and meet up. So the other guys were down in the basin. And funny story, I think they had run out of food. There was a little mishap with who was going to bring what food, and they didn't have enough. So those dudes were surviving on oatmeal. And Ken came back up to the truck just to grab a little bit more of what he could. And it was close to our rendezvous point. So I got up there. Our timing didn't quite sync up. So I just got to where I'm at the pen. I know I'm really close. I see some trucks right there that I think of them. I don't think they're here yet. I wasn't sure. Turns out Ken had just gotten there right before me and had already gone to sleep and was actually sleeping in one of the other trucks. So it worked out. But I got there. I wasn't sure what the deal was. I'm like, I'm not going to get out and set up a tent and set up all this stuff right now. So I just flipped the seats down, spread out my sleeping bag, and I just slept in the back of the rental. And it worked out. But man, one of the biggest shockers to me right off the bat. So I'm coming from Dallas, Texas, where it's been in the 90s for quite a while. This summer hasn't been a scorcher like some of them have been. We've had some summers where you just have dozens of days above 100 in a row. Fortunately, none of that but mid 90s was very consistent. Then it started finally cooling down into the low 90s. When I got into Idaho, it was 83. And to me, coming from the mid 90s, dropping 10 degrees down to 83, man, that felt pretty good. And that's what it was kind of when I was in the rental driving up. Then I got up to the top of the mountain, driving up all those rocky switchbacks, put out my sleeping bag, and I'm like, yeah, I know I'm sleeping in a truck, but I think it's going to get cold. I feel the temperature already dropping. It's really dry air up here. I'm going to go ahead and get in my 20-degree bag, spread everything out. And man, I am glad I did, because I woke up the next morning and it was 28 degrees. I had left some of my gear just sitting outside so that I had more room for my sleeping bag, and my water bottle was frozen. So that temperature change hit home real quick, going from 83 to 28 just overnight. Man, that was a big change. So that next morning, I took some time to kind of put up my sleeping bag, organize my gear. I kind of had everything in flight mode. This was the first year I had been traveling with the Easton. I don't know what they call it. I think the new version, they call it the bow truck, but it's basically a bow suitcase. It is a nice premium suitcase, but it is made specifically to hold a compound bow, and you can hold a bunch of other stuff in there. That means I had to take off my sight, which isn't a big deal for me because I have the detachable mount from Apex Gear. So I just loosen that thumb screw, slides right out, and take off my stabilizer to fit everything in there. Pro tip, I take those off. I'm bringing thick wool socks anyway. I put my sight in one wool sock, my stabilizer in another. Boom. Nothing's going to get banged up or dinged or bounced around because they're all padded, wrapped in those thick wool socks. So I did that, but the way I had packed, I brought so much gear, guys, just because I wasn't sure exactly what we were getting into. I wanted to make sure I had spare equipment in the truck. I had a spare release. I had spare broadheads. I had extra D-loop material. I had extra clothes. I had extra water. I had extra food. I wanted a little bit of everything extra to leave at the truck. So worst case scenario, we hike a couple miles back to the truck and we don't have to go into town and try to find some pro shop or something like that. And the one thing, well, there's two things that you can't bring with you when you fly into a trip like this. And it's pressurized gases. So you fly into a trip like this. I went in immediately to Cabela's, and they didn't have what I need. And I went into Dick's Sporting Goods. And I hate Dick's Sporting Goods. I don't want to give those guys a single dollar. I disagree with them on so many things. But when they're the only game in town, you kind of have to. So I went looking for isobutane fuel for my jet boil and for bear spray. And neither place had any bear spray. And this small sporting goods store and Cabela's and Dick's did not have isobutane. I finally found an REI that did have isobutane. So I was all set there and with bears. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just smack one with a trekking pole if it really gets into it. Hopefully that won't be an issue. Probably should have actually brought my revolver with me. I had really contemplated that beforehand, but ultimately I ended up not bringing it purely because of my holster system. Because I was really just trying to be honest with myself. I took my, I think it's a Bianchi revolver holster, and this is for my Taurus Tracker 44 mag, and I also have a 357. Either one of those I think would have been adequate for defending yourself from a black bear in the mountains. But man, just looking at my holster system, it comes down to, okay, do I run this on my thigh, on my hip? Well, on my hip is no-go because I'm probably going to have a pack on and off most of the trip. It's probably going to be on more than it's going to be off when I have a chance of encountering a bear. There just wasn't a good way to run the holster. I finally figured out one way that I could rig it on my hip, but trying to actually reach back there when I was all loaded up with my pack, my bino harness, holding my bow, holding a trekking pole, it was just a slow draw situation. I had to reach back way too far, take off the retention strap, pull it out, and man, it was a stretch. And I just had to realize, nope, this is not going to be something that I can actually use quickly. So if I can't use it practically, it's a hindrance more than it's a help. So that being said, I decided to leave the revolver at home. So I went looking for bear spray, couldn't find any. But honestly, you hear all these stories from backpackers, campers about bears raiding the trash can, raiding your food pile, digging through your pack, sniffing at the edge of your tent. I know it happens. I'm not trying to downplay it and say it doesn't happen. But I think areas like this where you can actually draw a bear tag and hunt black bear, I think when they get a scent of a human, they don't want anything to do with you. If they smell you, they want to get the heck out of there. And in fact, when I know other hunters and even these hooked hunting guys, whenever they get a kill, their strategy for keeping the bears away from the meat is to leave a sweaty shirt or some sweaty underwear near the kill so that the bears smell that human scent and just want to get out of there. So I don't think it's actually that much of a concern in a place like this. If you're in a place that's so wild where bears don't really ever encounter people, I think that's when it's a really serious issue. I think the second most serious issue is when you're actually in like a national park or someplace where the bears are very used to people and they know that people means trash and food and all that. So ultimately, I went off into the backcountry with no bear protection. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe it's reckless. I don't think so. I don't really regret my decision that much. Yeah, I think probably there's some things I could have done. I want to check out looking at thigh rigs to see if I can find a nice thigh holster for that revolver. That maybe would have been a good option. It would have been compatible with my pack, but I don't know. That's another thing to experiment with for another day. So let's get back to the adventure here. So that morning I got my pack all set up, got my gear arranged, got my bow put together. We grabbed as much food and water as we possibly could. So we were coming in with pretty heavy packs, heavier than I had initially planned on. I think I weighed my pack and I was at like 46, not including my bow, which I was carrying. So I was probably, and I don't even know if that was full water bottle. I might have topped it off again one more time. So I think I had a 50-pound pack on the way down. And I know some people are like, oh, 50 pounds, that's not that bad. When you're going through this really rugged stuff, the goal is to be as light as possible. There is no bravado in carrying a heavy pack. That doesn't make you cool. That doesn't make you tough. It makes you foolish. If you carry one thing that you don't need, that's just incredibly wasteful. And I realized I was wasteful in some of the things that I had brought. The goal is to bring as light a pack as possible, but you have to balance it with being prepared too. If you're going so ultra light, but then you get yourself in trouble because you are missing things that you really should have been, well, that's probably a worse problem than carrying a little bit too much weight. So it's a delicate balancing act, but that's a whole episode for another day, I think. So Ken and I got all set up. We started hiking down the hill. It was some kind of alpine, some small pines, and then the soil kind of got rocky. Then it kind of got crumbly, and you could tell we were in steep elk country from there. And kind of as we moved on, we would stop and call a little bit just to listen, see if we could find anything. Now, this was late morning, so it wasn't likely, but going through that kind of stuff, man, you just never know. If there may be a bedded bull sitting on some bench and then you walk right above or below him and you can pull him out a short distance. So there were times, areas that didn't look good that we moved through really quickly, kind of scrambled down the rocks. And yep, I took a couple spills going down that rough stuff because it was probably a 40-degree slope on that first day. It was really steep. And we're not on a trail. This is all off trail from here. So it was really tough stuff, and our goal was to meet up with the other guys by about lunch, and we did that. We had radios because in Idaho you actually can. In Montana you cannot use radios in the pursuit of big game, but Idaho doesn't have any rule like that, which kind of surprises me because Idaho is actually really, really strict on some other things. You can't use lighted nocks. I was not allowed to mount my GoPro to my bow, because Idaho considers it electronics that give you an unfair advantage, when it wouldn't have helped me out on my hunt whatsoever. Casey from Hooked Hunting actually did a really cool episode about this. It was after his muzzleloader hunt where he had originally brought some kind of mount to strap an action camera to his muzzleloader to record the shot, and then he realized it wasn't cool. They actually took down the episode for a while, talked to a game warden about it. The game warden gave him a written warning, said, hey, it didn't help him in his hunt, so he's not going to get a ticket. But it solidified the stance that no electronics can be mounted to a weapon whatsoever. I think the only exception being a red dot sight, a sight that does not project outside of the scope. So Idaho is pretty strict in that kind of stuff. So that didn't really affect me too much. It just surprised me that a state like Montana prohibits the use of radios, but Idaho is totally cool with it. But I'm glad they are, because honestly, it's not going to help you that much in terms of making a kill versus not, but it is going to help you a lot in terms of staying safe on the mountains. If you need a radio for help, if search and rescue is looking for somebody, having radios can be really important. So we were able to use the radios to find the other guys. But what's really funny is before we were even in range of radios, we would bugle, they would bugle back, and of course we'd hear it and be like, oh, that's not an elk, that's a Doug Flutie over there. And I think some of it was just the really aggressive, loud bugle right in the middle of the day that was uncharacteristic for an elk. It's not that their calls sounded bad. It was more just the loud, aggressive bugle right in the middle of the day. We're like, oh, that's them. It's coming from the right direction, and they're definitely calling us. So we got down there and met up with those guys. So we met up on a sunny hillside. They were kind of watching a wallow, so we kind of just took a break, had lunch. Some of the guys kind of took a nap in the sun. I was kind of excited from just getting out there ready to go, that I wasn't really tired at all, but had lunch, and they had the whole team of pack goats with them as well. And this was the first hunt that I had ever been on where they had goats to pack out meat. This was a brand new experience for me. Casey had sent me some pictures of them and showed me the goats before, but I had never hunted with goats. And now it makes a whole lot of sense seeing that terrain. It is so steep. There are a lot of places we hunted that you could not get a horse. You definitely couldn't get a motorized vehicle because A, it's illegal and it wouldn't have worked anyway. But just going through this thick deadfall, dark timber, yeah, there are places you couldn't get a horse. I've seen llamas as kind of a emerging trend for pack stock. When I went to Peru several years ago, obviously they're kind of from that area, so it was a pretty standard thing. But in Idaho, it's becoming more popular to use llamas to get stuff out of the mountains, and goats are very similar. They can't hold as much, but man, they are nimble, they're agile, and you really don't have to feed them. Every time you stop on the trail, they're nibbling away at something. So it was cool to see the goats. Of course, you're sitting there trying to bow hunt. You're trying to be quiet, and then a goat walks up and farts in your face. I mean, it just seems how it goes with these things. Maybe I can get Casey on for another podcast episode if he's interested, just to talk about pack goats and hunting with goats and what you need to know and why it's a great tool and when you should and when you shouldn't. I think that'd be a cool episode, so I'll see if he's interested in that. But we sat on that water hole for a little while, ate our lunch, and then we decided, okay, we had been there long enough. Let's go ahead and take the long road back to camp. And when I say the long road, it's not the hill that we just hiked on. We intentionally went around another hill so that we could glass up a different hillside just to see if anything was out there. And we hiked and hiked all the way till dark. And it was almost dark when we stopped, and we're like, we've still got a little bit of light left. We can still have a good view of that hill. Let's just sit here and glass. And I'm glad we did, because that night we actually glassed a bull all the way across the valley on a rock slide on an opposing slope. And I pulled out my rangefinder, and y'all, I was amazed that my rangefinder actually tagged this far. So I was not ranging the actual bull. I was ranging a rock right by him. But I pulled out my rangefinder, and it read 1,391 yards. So for y'all who know, 1760 is a mile. So this is just shy of a mile, about 3/4 of a mile over there. We're watching this bull just with 10 power binoculars. Man, I think the guys were using SIG binoculars that are very good. I had my Steiner binoculars. I don't regret not bringing a spotting scope. I think for as much gear as we were trying to bring in as compact a setup, there wasn't room for a tripod and a spotting scope. But having good binoculars, man, it is crucial for that kind of stuff. So I was glad to see that bull. We all saw him. It wasn't just like a fleeting glimpse. We all watched him for several minutes, but we realized it's almost dark right now. That is a massive slope. There is no way we can get over there. We'll just see about making a play on him at some point tomorrow. So we kept going down that slope, hiked into camp, got back there pretty late, and I don't think it was much of a big deal for the other guys, but I realized I did something really, really dumb. I brought my headlamp. I use a black diamond headlamp that I've had for years, and man, I love that thing. But when I had camped out in the truck, I had kind of hung that on the handle right above me in the truck to kind of use as my little night light for getting settled, and I hadn't brought it with me. I did have a handheld, fortunately, but it's just not as good for hiking. So we kind of hiked in the dark, got there. They immediately started getting dinner ready. I had to set up my tent, so I was a little bit flustered and running behind. But you know what? It had been a good day. We had seen an elk. We had had a good hike. We were tired. We got to camp. Like I said, I pitched my tent, got all set up. We had some mountain house meals that night. And funny story, I think I mentioned there was a little mishap with somebody thinking that he was going to bring all this food, and then he didn't bring all that. And then we kind of just all had to pitch together and share. And it all worked out. Nobody starved. Nobody went hungry. We definitely had enough for sure. So we all just kind of shared meals, and that was going to be kind of a trend for the rest of the trip. So fortunately that night when we got down in the valley, it was quite a bit warmer. I bet you sleeping there, it was probably low 50s, upper 40s, somewhere around there. Big difference from that 28-degree cold morning temperature from the day before. And as we were sitting there eating some house and just kind of telling stories and relaxing and catching up, we actually heard some bugles not too far from camp. And we were sitting in this valley, and so they kind of echoed, but we were just listening carefully. And of course, we're all sitting there. You hear a bugle. Instinctively, everybody in elk camp turns and points the way you think you heard. And hopefully you're all pointing in the same direction. Sometimes you're all pointing in all different ways. And it's kind of comical when you just hear one, like way in the background, and then everybody just turns and points a different way. But sometimes sound just bounces around funny in the mountains. But man, this one, we all knew which way it was, and it was close. This bull was maybe 300 yards from us. He was close. So we went to bed confident. We're like, well, okay, he's right there. He's right there. We'll get in on him in the morning. So we are excited. So the next morning, we got up, had our breakfast. We even got all the goats ready because we're like, okay, we're going up there. We're gonna go kill this bull, and we're gonna pack out. And just a little backstory. So the goats were there not to carry our gear as much as to carry the meat out if we killed. So each one of those goats could carry 40 pounds each. So we still had to carry all our own stuff. And if the goats are carrying a load the whole time, they're going to be super slow and obnoxious. So they're there for when you got to hike out extra stuff, not just to carry your gear normal day by day. We realized that we were going to come back and camp in the same spot. So this is actually the only time where we left our tent set up. So we left our tent set up, but pretty much took everything else. And I was relieved to have a really, really lightweight pack after bringing in all that extra stuff on that 50-pound pack the day before. Man, my pack, it just felt like it wasn't even there going up that next slope. So we went up and we went through some thick, dark timber. And y'all, this just looked as elky as possible. Every tree seemed to be torn up. There were rubs all over the place. We were in their bedroom. And I know I'm explaining all this through audio, but I put kind of a summary video of this hunt on YouTube. I just called it Backcountry Hunting Adventure. Go check it out. If you want to see what all this looks like, if you want to see this beautiful terrain, if you want to see all these trees that are all torn up by elk, go on YouTube and watch that video. And because the hunt was not just a kill shot, highlight reel, anything like that, I turned it into more of kind of a cinematic adventure, just exploring the backcountry. So if you've got some time to kill, you want to relax, get a drink, or put it on while you're eating dinner, turn up the sound and just watch this adventure. So I encourage you to check that out. But we went through this backcountry, went through all this dark timber. It was beautiful, seemed super elky. We heard a couple bugles and we realized, yep, he's He's just a little further down than where he was last night. So we set up. We had one guy calling in the back, and then the 3 hunters, me, Toby, and Casey, all set up at different points on the slope. We just knew that he was going to come up that slope, and one of us was going to get a shot. And one thing that we did have to consider is we got in the area pretty early, and then the thermals were all wrong. It was still cool, and the air was still coming down the mountain. And he was down below us in elevation. So we realized, yeah, we could get super close to him. We have so much time, we could get in on him. But we were better off waiting till it warmed up, which generally for big game animals, I feel like nobody says, yeah, it'll be better when it's warmer. Like, that's a really rare thing. Usually it's the cold that gets stuff moving. But when it warmed up a little bit, we knew that the thermals were going to switch and the air was going to start going up the mountain, meaning the wind would naturally be in our favor for all of us. So as soon as it switched, we pushed another 150 yards, got in closer, and man, he had to have been just right down the hill from us, probably 200, maybe 300 yards from us. And we just heard him go, "Ugh, ugh," just do this kind of grunt and groan a couple times. But he never came up. So he must have just bedded down and was content where he was. We never heard any cow calls. So I don't know if he was actually with a group of cows or if he was off by himself, but he was pretty comfortable in where he was. We never saw him. We never boogered him up. But we realized, well, okay, it's about noon right now. Let's go fill up our waters. So we went into this little creek where we filled up our water. And I say it was a creek. It was more of just kind of a spring kind of bubbling out of the dirt. And this is where different people have different ideas of water purification. Some of these guys have been doing this so long, like, oh, we hunt here all the time. We never filter water. Why would you filter water? It's just a waste of time. Whereas other guys would never dream of drinking any water without filtering it. I'm somewhere in between. When I see a crystal clear, high altitude mountain stream, I'm not worried about it. I know that snow melt running against hard rocks. That's not what you need to worry about. Yeah, maybe there's a tiny bit of dirt in it, but no big deal. It's not the dirt, it's the bacteria. And the bacteria comes from people going in the bathroom or swimming near water or in the water, and from animals, cattle, elk, livestock, animals basically drinking the water, defecating in the water. That's what causes the bacteria growth that you need to be worried about. Namely, Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Those are the ones that get the most people sick when they drink unfiltered water. But this is one of the times where I saw the water. I knew we were in elk habitat. It was muddy water bubbling out of the ground. I said, I'm going to go ahead and filter it. So this year I was packing along the Sawyer squeeze system. Previous hunts, I have used a Katadyn pump style filter, but this year was my first year using the squeeze. There's some advantages and disadvantages to it. Overall, I like it though. I'll probably do a whole other podcast just about water filtration, water purification, just talking about that stuff. But I did filter it. We all got our water topped off. We had lunch right there, and then we said, okay, we've got a long hike ahead of us. Let's see if we can get up that hill to where that bull was the night before. That way, when the thermal's still going up, we can actually go up above him and then be looking down on where he was ahead of when he comes out, assuming he comes out the same time, same place the next night. So we did that, and man, the terrain got rough. It went from beautiful, rugged alpine hills where you can just see for miles. And I got some beautiful pictures up there too. Just those open views to down in the valleys. Man, it turned into jungle where I was just bent over pushing through vines and ferns and just trying to just slug ahead any way I could. Then it opened up into thick, dark timber again, and then rock slides. And that terrain, I think this is just Idaho. It's Rocky Mountains, but in such a diverse, interesting way. It does not look like Colorado. It has its own feel to it. And while it's beautiful, man, it makes the going so slow when you're trying to get to an objective to get up above that elk so that you're ready to go the next day. So we got worn out, man, hiking up the rock slides and the deadfalls. It was all 5 of us plus the goats. But we did it. We got there. And we got there what I thought was just in time, a little bit early, and guess what? No elk. So either the swirling wind had messed us up and we had boogered that elk, or he just wasn't there that day. And that's something I tell a whole lot of people is, when I'm out on a hunt, somebody may go into my apartment and they'll be like, okay, his bedding area is right here, his food's right here, this is perfect. But he's just not there right now. That's just how it works sometimes. So I don't know if we had messed him up or he just wasn't there that day. But we did not hear a bugle. We tried bugling, we tried cow calling, we tried glassing. We could not turn up an elk. So at that point, we realized, well, we had spent most of the day getting up here. Fortunately, we do not have time to kill something. We're not seeing anything, so we got to turn back and pretty much hunt our way down. So you can come back down a mountain much faster than you can go up it. So it took us about a third of the time to get back down. But we were also kind of stopping to call and listen along the way. So we got back to camp. This is the exact same spot where we had camped the night before. So we basically said, well, we gave it a good try. Good day, y'all. So once again, ate our mountain house meals. Pretty much just went to bed early. I think we heard some bugles again that night, just kind of teasing us. But that time it wasn't as obvious where they were coming from. Went to bed. Next morning, got up. Had my coffee, had my Cliff Bar, and I had a pretty good meal system too. So every day I had a little bag of fruit snacks and a Cliff Bar, and then my coffee bag. So again, I'll probably do another podcast about my meal system. I know I've talked about this kind of stuff in the past, but it's detailed enough, and I've put enough thought into it, and I feel like I finally perfected my system that it deserves an episode of its own. But we got all packed up, took down the tents, packed up the goats, and headed out. So we decided that we had kind of messed with these bulls in this valley enough, and we wanted to just go see what else was out there. Go over to the next basin, hopefully turn up another bull that hadn't been pressured as much, or a bull that was a little bit more responsive to us. So we hiked out of there. So in doing that, we took the whole train of goats again through some really, really thick brush, down a really steep hill, across a creek, and then up another really steep hill. And again, the goal was just to look into that next basin. And I feel like that's part of the allure of elk hunting. You're just always wondering, what's over that next ridge? And that's kind of what keeps you going at times. And I really appreciate that. It's kind of the power of curiosity, honestly. You realize, well, it's not working here, but you have to have that stubborn optimism that says, I think there's something over that next ridge. Let's give it a try. Let's get over there. Let's do it. So we did it. And of course, it's slow going the whole way because we were going uphill the whole way across some really, really rugged stuff. One thing that I saw that I had never seen before is I saw a massive pine tree. I'm talking 100-foot tall pine tree just fall down. The wind was blowing. At first, I thought I heard like rocks sliding, and then I thought I heard a rifle shot. Nope, it was this tree just crushing down. And I realized for the next couple hours as I was walking up this slope, I was seeing all these dead trees standing up. And as I walked under each and every one of them, I was wondering, well, I hope this isn't the one that gets me. Because, man, seeing that massive tree fall down so quickly, you could have maybe darted to roll out of the way of it. But if it's coming and if that thing gets you, you're done, man. And that's why they call them widowmakers, and that's why they say don't ever set up a tent under a dead branch like that, because if it decides to fall, there's no reaction time. So that had me a little bit spooked. Not scared, but more just, I had never seen that in the wild before. I see evidence of it all the time, but just to see a tree that big just almost spontaneously just dump over, man, that was powerful. So we went up the steep hill. As soon as we got up there, it started to rain and the wind started to blow. And I had looked at the forecast and it said, yeah, there was a chance of stuff, but the forecast was for the town miles and miles away. So up in the mountains, you never really know what that means. You never know if, well, yeah, it's going to hit down there in the valley, but it's going to avoid it up here. Usually that's a little too optimistic. Generally, things are more extreme in the mountains, in whichever way that is. If it says it's going to be windy, it's going to be worse in the mountains. If it says it's going to be cold, buckle up. It's going to get snowy and icy and really cold. If it says it's going to be hot and sunny, it's probably going to be really dry and hot and sunny. The mountains are just more extreme in every single way. So when we got that spitting rain coming down, that gusty wind, we kept going for a little bit, and then it started raining worse and worse. And I actually pulled out my radio. So something that I did this spring, a little project of mine, was actually to get licensed on my ham radios. Now, you can listen to the weather channels without being licensed, but I just wanted to learn more about it. And it's just a little Baofeng UV5R, but it saved me from a tornado once. And ever since then, I respect having that weather radio with me. And so to pull that out, turn on NOAA, and hear that, yeah, it's going to be raining for at least the next day, that kind of gave us enough information to make a plan of action. So from there, we headed up the Spine Ridge. Our goal was to get to a buddy's tent. So Casey had a buddy who had a whole pretty much wall tent camp set up a couple miles away that he was not using at the time. So we were just going to crash in there for one night, then move on, be on our way. So that's what we did. So we hiked out of there, took a little while. I got to see a tree that was all clawed up by a black bear. Like I said, I didn't have any bear protection with me, but I wasn't too worried. It was more just kind of an interesting thing to see. And then we just kind of dodged the rain. It rained off and on through the rest of the afternoon as we were making our way over there. The gear that we had was fairly waterproof. We had QU gear. We were all pretty much wearing the same thing. I did have my Cabela's rain jacket on for a little while, but what's great about that thing is it's super lightweight and super waterproof, but I don't think there's really such thing as totally waterproof and breathable in any way. And so when you start hiking in that thing, man, you're going to get drenched from your sweat, maybe more than drenched from the rain. So I had that for a little while, then ended up taking it off, and we just hiked in the rest of the way. By the time we got there, we were all pretty wet, pretty tired. It was just before dark, so we said, okay, we're just going to hunker down here. We took the goats, kind of tied them all up to trees, spread them out, got them all tucked in, and then we piled into that wall tent, and then made our mountain house dinners in that tent, and then pretty much just hit the sack. We were exhausted. So the next morning was intentionally a bit slower. So we were up on this ridge. We got up. We weren't on elk. We didn't really know where they were. We didn't have anywhere urgent to be. And this was actually the last day that Casey and Toby were going to be with us. So they hiked through that night, and then today was the day they were heading out, because they had been there, I think, 3 days longer, 3 days ahead of when I got in there with Ken. So they were going to head out. So we packed up our stuff, kind of organized our gear. Again, the goats were there with those guys primarily to hopefully haul out some elk meat. We realized, okay, we've accumulated a fair amount of trash. We've got some extra clothes and some extra things that we don't really need. I ended up breaking one of my gaiters that I was wearing. I think they were outdoor research, and they were a couple years old. So they had been pretty good to me for a while, but they finally just gave up the ghost. So any stuff like that, broken gear, trash, extra gear, we packed up on the goats, and they were going to take that out. And then we slowed down a little bit the next morning to do something really cool and really honorable, I think. So Ken's buddy Jim, they had a lifetime of hunting together up in the mountains. And sadly, Jim passed away this last year. I never met Jim. He sounded like a great hunter, a guy who was full of laughter, full of fun, full of great stories. He just sounded like an amazing dude, but he passed away this last year. And they had so many memories with Jim on this mountain that they went out and spread his ashes on the mountain that morning. And I didn't even know this guy, but what a powerful, powerful, touching moment in seeing that these mountains have so much just power to them. They can be rugged and merciless, but they can also be the most peaceful, relaxing place ever. So to have his ashes spread across those mountains was pretty powerful, even for a guy I did not get the pleasure to know. And so they said a couple words, just took some time to do some quick videos. I don't know if it'll ever be shown on the channel, if it's just for his family, but they just told stories of Jim and honoring a fellow hunter and a fellow friend. And I thought that was really powerful. So we took it slow that morning to try to really honor him, honor that time. And then, like I said, Casey and Toby were packing up. They were headed out. So that just left me, Ken, and Nate, the filmmaker. So we headed out. We had all our gear, food, tents, everything on our back. Again, that's kind of a theme of this whole trip. That one night in the wall tent's the only time we didn't use it. But the rest of the time, this was a fully backpack-in hunt. We weren't stopping to resupply somewhere. We weren't getting more food. We weren't using other people's shelters. Everything was on our back the entire time. Our goal was to get close to the elk, sleep close to the elk, and then kill them when we could. So we headed off in another direction. Of course, everything was still wet. It was still a little bit drizzly. But as the sun started to come out, it created this beautiful, beautiful fog as the clouds kind of descended through the mountains. I got some great shots. Again, if you go watch that video, there's a few scenes of that next morning where you can just see the clouds are just kind of these beautiful magical vapors just kind of moving through the trees, moving through the valleys, and it was really, really cool. But as we moved through the valley, we set up in a few spots that just looked so elky. They just looked perfect. And we would set up and kind of do a calling sequence with me now being the only archer. Our strategy was a little different. So Ken would set up somewhere and call, and a lot of times he would bugle, and then whenever he would cow call, I would cow call back to him. And so sometimes our goal was to sound like a group of lost cows that needed to be sorted out and wrangled up by a bull. So that was kind of our plan, or we'd do kind of a cow-calf routine. It sounded pretty convincing and pretty realistic to me, but I don't think there was ever a bull close enough or that really responded or wanted to come and check it out, unfortunately. So we did a couple of those setups, and then we eventually hiked and got out of that thick timber, hit one little spot, and the sun came out just long enough for us to kind of lay down, relax, eat our lunch, and chat for a bit. And so that's what we did. So right after that, we started our descent down a really, really steep slope, again, through timber way, way thicker than I had imagined. When you imagine the Rocky Mountains, you don't imagine ferns and vines and thick, tangly timber, but by golly, it's out there. So we headed down through that thick stuff and then got to a stream down at the bottom. And of course, right when we were at the very bottom, it really started raining again. Great. We got to deal with this steep stuff and this climb in all this wet foliage that's tangling us. So it was tricky, but we did it. So we climbed up out of there, climbed the steep slope. We got most of the way up. The first kind of flat spot we hit, we said, you know what? We're pretty soaked. This QU water resistant stuff had done a really good job for a long time, but any clothing, when it's just getting drenched for multiple days without a chance to really dry out, it's going to meet its match and just be saturated eventually. And the QU stuff did better than anything else. My gloves, my hat, everything else was pretty soaked. But we took a little time to just build a small fire there, just kind of dry out, and just kind of hang out a little bit while we waited out the rest of the rainstorm. So we mostly got dried out. We definitely got to relax and rest a little bit, kind of joke around and talk. And I think mostly we just got sick of waiting it out. We realized, yeah, we're headed to look at a new area where hopefully there's elk. We're kind of just wasting our time here. We're dry enough. Let's get going. So we put that fire out, then started hiking. And of course, as soon as we started hiking, started drizzling again. Then we side-hilled around another deep ravine. And I think some of that side-hilling stuff is some of the hardest hiking out there. Going down can really be painful on your toes, and going up can be painful on your heels, and it can be really slow going when you're going straight up. But when you're side-hilling on a 30-degree slope with just your ankles crooked the whole time, leaning into the slope, not too bad for a little while, but when you do that for an hour straight, that gets old pretty quick. So we did that for a couple hours, actually side-hilling around this deep gorge, then kind of going up the next spine ridge. We got on a spine ridge that was just a knife edge. It was narrow. And we started moving up there, and then, of course, it started drizzling again more and more. It would kind of drizzle for a while, then we'd see a patch of blue sky, then drizzle for a while, another patch of blue sky. And it's like we were just cheering on the blue sky, it felt like. But it started getting dark again, and as it did, we heard bugles. It had been a while, but we started hearing bugles again. So we were really excited to hear them, and it kind of sounded like they were coming from where we had just side-hilled. Maybe a little bit above where we had just side-hilled. So we heard them, we listened to them. We all kind of got a consensus on where we thought they were, but we realized once again we'd have to go down this huge slope and back up it. There's no way to get in on them tonight. It's just not going to happen. So we're just going to camp here close to them, maybe a couple 100 yards across the ridge, and camp out, try to be real quiet, and then get in on them in the morning. And what's a common theme through all this stuff, just in this steep terrain, is you can hear bugles and you can know there's a bull 500 yards away from you. But to go all the way down and then come all the way up could take you a half a day. And you got to time that right with the thermals too. You don't want to be coming up as the thermals are going up and blowing your scent right to them. So there's a lot of strategy to it, and something that's simple is, yep, he's over there. Even if we know how far he's over there, it can still be a lot more difficult. So we seemed like we were in a decent position from where we thought the bulls were. We quietly made camp, ate our dinner that night, and pretty much just went to bed. And that was not the most comfortable campsite because we pretty much set up with all our gear being fairly wet, not totally soaked, but a little bit wet. Again, we were just trying to be quiet, be calm, use our headlamps, but at a minimum, pretty much just go to bed. And through the night, Ken would wake up every once in a while if he ever was tossing and turning or had to get up and go to the bathroom, anything like that, and he would blow on the bugle tube from his tent. And I thought this was actually a decent strategy because he wanted them, A, to get used to the sound of that bugle to make it sound convincing and consistent, not just something that they heard once and then didn't know. He wanted them to make it sound like it was an elk that they were familiar with. But then also bugling in the middle of the night is not something that most hunters do. So it's a little bit non-standard, but it's the idea of, oh yeah, we heard that guy yesterday. Yep, he's still there today. Gain some familiarity, and I think it was an interesting strategy. It's hard to know if it really worked or not, but I appreciated the thought of it. The next morning, we went off to chase those bulls. So we got up a little bit earlier than we had the other days. Before sunup, got our tents, got our sleeping bags, got everything packed up. One thing that did affect all of us a little bit negatively is just because all our gear was a little bit wet, and then it was just still so humid. Normally the mountains are so dry that you never have to worry about this, but it was so humid from those rainstorms, and then it was cold. All our breath and all our gear was just condensing. We had so much condensation in the side of our tent that it almost felt like it was raining inside of our tent when it had stopped raining outside. So this meant none of our gear really dried up, so we had to put away all our tents wet, which I don't like doing, but sometimes you just got to do it. But we got all packed up. I ate my Cliff Bar, had my coffee, was ready to roll. So we went after those elk the next morning. Again, side-hilled, a little higher than we had side-hilled the previous night, but up basically the same gorge. Side-hilled around, ran into one little fast-moving stream where we topped off our water for that day. And then this was just kind of a trickle, just kind of a seep coming out of the ground. But pro tip, if you see water coming out of the ground, but there's not a deep enough pool to fill up a water bottle or anything, what we did and what you can do is take 2 rocks, wedge them in there where you see the water moving, and then take a piece of bark, either pine bark, birch bark, anything that you can find, and kind of ramp it up over those rocks to make a little spigot. So we did that to make a little spigot to fill up all our water bottles. So we did that, and every time I went from almost out of water to very full, it took me a couple minutes to get back in the groove with the balance and the feel of my pack. On flat land, no big deal, not anything to worry about. But when you're climbing over logs and you're on 30-degree steep angles, being very top heavy all of a sudden definitely changes the way you move for sure. So after filling up, we started going over this side hill that was just, everything of course was still wet and it was slick, and there were just all these wet logs and just thick brush, and man, it was tough stuff to climb through. And as we got over there, we kept hearing bugles in front of us. We're like, okay, we're going in the right direction. This is a good sign. We're working in on them. This is very good. But then we also heard bugles coming from behind us. And at first I was almost thinking, no, wait, I misheard that. He's clearly in front of us. Maybe it's just echoing off that hill. Nope, we heard bugles behind us. And sure enough, we turned around, and it was almost right where we had camped the night before, on that ridge, on that knife edge. We heard bugles, and we saw a cow come over the hill, and then another cow come over the hill, and then a bull pushing them. And I didn't get a good look at the bull, but I saw his antlers went at least to his shoulders. So he was a mature bull. I don't think he was any sort of record or massive trophy, but I was going for legal elk. So any bull with a bow would have been a trophy for me. And to see that guy come thundering through right where we had just been, in a way was really exciting, but was also disappointing. And at that point, I remember Ken turning around to me and saying, okay, we're now at a place where we have to make a choice. We have elk one way and elk the other way. We can't go after both of them. What do you want to do? And I feel like in hindsight, maybe I made the wrong choice here. I'm not really sure. Not because of the elk, but because of terrain and other things. I just was looking at seeing those bulls just kind of run over that hill and keep going. I realized there's no way we're catching up to those things. They're just going to keep going and going. And maybe they'll stop, but considering it took us 45 minutes to get over the hill that they just did in 4, we weren't going to catch up to those things. So looking at the elk that was down below us, we had the wind in our favor. It was thick timber. Like, this guy, by comparison, seems kind of like a homebody, and I think we can get in on him. So we said, okay, that's the one we're going to go for. So we went over there, and as we kept moving that way, the terrain got thicker and thicker and steeper, and we realized there's a reason why he's hiding out in this spot. He feels so safe. Nothing can get to him here on this bench. And we made it out that way, and it ended up turning into just steep blowovers and log jams, and was really, really difficult to move. And we were trying to be as quiet as we could, but branches were snapping inevitably. And so I don't know if he heard us. I don't know if he smelled us. I don't know what happened. But we would hear him bugle every once in a while, and it gave us enough hope to say, yeah, he's in there. Let's keep going. And we kept pushing in, and we got to a point where we literally found his bed. We found a fresh bed, fresh elk tracks, fresh elk droppings. We're like, he was right here. So either he got up and just moved down the hill slightly, or we pushed him a little bit, but he's close. So we set up, called, with Ken calling behind me, and in that thick stuff, it was going to be top pin or nothing. He was going to come running in at 20, 25 yards, and it would be zinging an arrow right through him, or we wouldn't see him at all. Unfortunately, it was the latter that happened. We did all that. It looked like such a great spot, but we didn't see anything. So we tried that, I think, 2 different setups, and then we said, well, it's not working. I don't know why. It looks like a perfect spot. Maybe he saw us coming over the ridge. Maybe he heard us. Maybe the wind swirled and he smelled us. I don't think so. The wind had been pretty good for the most part, but you never know. An elk like that who's just going to bugle his head off, he's going to feel pretty safe wherever he's hanging out. If he's going to sit in the same spot all night, you know it's a good spot. So for whatever reason, it didn't work out. We started trudging back up the hill, and again at that point we realized, okay, we're once again all wet, pretty tired, and it's almost lunchtime. So we started a small fire. It took us a while to get this one going just because all the branches, everything was wet. But eventually we got it going. Mostly got our boots dried out. I don't think we ever totally got our boots dried out the whole trip, but got that going. Had lunch there, took a little break, and it was much needed relaxation to kind of mentally recalibrate and rest and just kind of separate ourselves from that attempt that seemed so good but didn't work out. So after lunch, we decided, okay, we're going to get up to the top of the ridge. That's kind of where probably both these elk, both the one that had passed our campsite and where we were, had passed behind us, that one, and the one we had been chasing after, they had both probably come up and over this ridge. So we need to get up there. That's kind of towards our way out anyway. Seemed like a good call. But once we were down in that thick stuff where that elk was, it's almost like he had led us into a trap. We started pushing through some of the worst deadfalls that I had ever been in. These are patches that, you see them from a mile off looking at a slope and you think, wow, that looks rough. Or sometimes it doesn't even look rough at all. You just see all this thick timber and then you see an open spot. Well, that's not an open spot. There's just as many trees there. They're just all laying on the ground. And that's exactly what this was. This is a 30 to 40 degree slope, incredibly steep. Some of the steepest stuff I had ever climbed, littered with just thick logs. And a lot of them were wet too. And thick brush as we pushed up through that stuff. It was crazy just dealing with that. And we kept going up and up. And for a while, I think there were times where I'm like, I don't think my feet touched the ground for the last 100 yards. It's just all logs. It was crazy. And we went through 1,200 feet of elevation through all that stuff. And that 1,200 feet may not sound like that far, but flat distance, it's not. But 1,200 feet of elevation, holy smokes. There were times where I was just getting so frustrated just because you're pushing forward and you're working really hard. And sometimes just like your feet can't gain traction and your legs are hung up. And at one point I did fall and hit my thigh really hard. And I currently have a huge bruise on the back of my thigh. I'm fortunate that nobody got hurt. Nobody twisted an ankle, nothing serious. Just one big bruise to remind me of just kind of my stubbornness in that moment. But man, that area was tough. And I don't know if those were deadfalls from avalanche damage. Could have been like pine beetles that just killed a bunch of stuff and then the wind blew it over. Could have been fire that kind of scorched the area and then wind blew it over after that. I don't really know what the root cause was. I just know that half the trees were laying down on the ground and it was a pain in the butt. So we climbed through that. Then we finally made it up to the top. And at that point, I was pretty exhausted. That was probably like my lowest point attitude-wise in the whole trip. I try to maintain a almost obnoxiously positive attitude most of the time. I think positive mental attitude, PMA, is just such a powerful factor in this kind of stuff. To be a hunter, you have to be a stubborn optimist to say, yeah, there's one over the next hill. There's going to be a good spot. You just have to be so optimistic. And I think at that time I was just so frustrated from these deadfalls that I was in a little bit of a low spot. But we finally got up to the top. And then when we found the horse trail up there, Ken shouted out that he had found it. And man, I was excited. I think just a 1 foot wide dirt trail on rocky soil, it never seems like a good thing. But when you just come through all those deadfalls and then you find just a dirt trail like that, it seemed like the best thing in the world. So we got on that horse trail and just our speed tripled as soon as we got on that thing, quadrupled probably as soon as we got on that trail. So we just started moving. And then sure enough, on the horse trail, we walked up and there was a guy standing there holding a bunch of horses. Turns out it was an outfitter who had been running a camp further down the ridge, past, not in the direction that we were, but not in the direction that we were headed, but kind of the direction similar to where we had come from, but further down the horse trail. And he had dropped off hunters previously, and he was actually picking them up. So we said, okay, cool, have a good night. Passed him, and then probably another quarter mile or so, we kept going, and sure enough, we passed all the hunters. And it was funny. One guy was from Missouri, and he was all excited and worked up about thinking there's bears out there, and maybe there are, but it was just funny to see his attitude. And those were really the only guys we ran into the whole time. To think that you can go hiking for 6 days on public land and only run into one other group of guys is pretty wild. That's something that I'm just not used to, that we don't have in Texas. You pull up to one spot of public and there's 4 white Ford trucks in front of it half the time. So just to run into some guys out there, I don't know. I wasn't too bothered by the pressure, considering we had so much time just seeing terrain all by ourselves. They were coming out, we were going in. So our strategy was just to go further than they had. So at that point, we kind of hustled and we said, okay, let's get another mile and a half down the trail. And we did. And so we got there and set up camp that night. And it was a beautiful little campsite that we had set up. And it was funny. Right at dark, I saw just a little flutter across the trail, just, and I realized exactly what it was. I'm like, that was a rough grouse or a spruce grouse. And with an archery tag, you can actually hunt small game, including grouse. So I had one arrow in my quiver with a bird point, a little judo point, for that exact occasion. But I think it was just so late, so dark. I never quite caught up to him, never got a shot. But as soon as I heard that, I knocked that arrow and went running off after him. But never got a shot at that grouse, ran out of light. And so we just kind of went back to camp, got set up the tents. Again, cooked Mountain House and mashed potatoes. And I think that was one of the things. We had Mountain House a lot, but in terms of just amount of calories for something that tastes pretty good, that's something that's super easy, I need to incorporate more mashed potatoes in my camping meals, just instant potatoes, the Idaho and foil pack type stuff. It's pretty good. It's cheap. It's easy to pack. It's lightweight. That became a common theme for our meals. But we got all set up. We were back on top of the ridge, so it actually got pretty cold again that night. So I had my 20-degree bag and my liner. I probably would have been okay with just my 20-degree bag, but it was definitely more comfortable with the liner. So I used all of that night. So got decent sleep. It did get chilly that night, but slept okay. One problem that seems like with my sleeping system is I am a side sleeper. And so inevitably, it seems like my hip bone manages to find a rock that keeps waking me up, and I keep tossing and turning, and I just go from one hip to the other with that rock. And that seemed to be one of the problems that night, but not too bad. I actually got decent sleep. But the next morning, we woke up, had our breakfast. We had this beautiful golden light kind of coming up as the sun rose, so I kind of stopped, slowed down, and got some pictures. And then that morning, we realized we were kind of on an out and back spur part of the trail. And this is really the only time we were kind of even on a trail at all through the whole trip. So we realized, well, we're going to be coming, this is our last day, and we're going to be coming back the way we came in. So we're just going to leave camp here. So we did that, went out that morning, very quiet, very still, just started going down the trail. At one point we stopped, Ken bugled. We waited, listened, didn't hear anything. Kept going down the trail. We went about 50 yards, turned a corner, looked in the trail, and there was a bull just standing there in the trail. And I think at the time I just said, "Whoa, stop." Or maybe I just said, "Whoa." Maybe I didn't even say stop, but I just remember saying, "Whoa," because he was right there. Because I didn't want to say anything sudden. He was right there. He was 40 yards. He was in bow range. This is the first bull of the entire trip that had been in bow range. And of course, I start taking off my gloves. I start pulling an arrow out of the quiver. And again, this is like almost like when you're a little kid falling off your bike and the world just seems to move in slow motion. I saw him turn, look at us, and then just bolt. He just ran out of there. He didn't make a single sound. And what's crazy is we had bugled right back there, and he didn't respond. I don't know that he was coming into the call. It's just like he was walking through the woods and happened to be walking across the trail right there. And man, after seeing a bull almost a mile away and climbing through all those deadfalls and all the struggles and frustration, it felt like that one, God was just like handing it up to us, being like, "Well, here's your bull. Have at it." And we just stumbled into him. And we weren't ready. At that time, if I had been moving slowly down the trail and I had an arrow nocked and I had been paying attention, maybe I could have made it happen. So I don't know what's the right thing to do there, because you don't want to be hiking down the trail with an arrow nocked all the time. But we definitely got caught off guard. And in one way, it was super exciting to see that bull. And I don't think it was a massive trophy, but again, legal bull, mature bull, probably a 5x5, definitely a big-bodied animal. And it was so exciting to see, but it was also disheartening too, because the whole time we had been working so hard, and then here's our chance, a split-second chance, and then we blew it. There it goes. So I don't think there are any critical mistakes that we made other than it's almost like still hunting whitetail. Like, you can't go slow enough. If we had slowed down and been more observant, maybe we would have seen him in time. But even that, it was just such a chance encounter that who knows, really. But after that, it was kind of a combination of emotions, a lot of highs and a lot of lows all at once. So we kept moving down the trail, probably moved another mile down the trail, and then sure enough, we heard footsteps, hoof steps off through the woods. And we're like, okay, I think we just spooked another one. And we were tempted to almost be just like swearing in frustration, but we realized, well, we heard something run off. Yeah, like, so something definitely got spooked, but maybe it's not that bad because I don't think it got our wind. I don't think it saw us. It just heard us walking down the trail. And unlike whitetail, elk are big, loud creatures. So just because it hears something walking down the trail, you're not necessarily made. You're not necessarily done at that point. So I said, okay, let's just back up a little bit, spread out, go down kind of the direction that we heard it go, very quietly and stealthily, and then start calling. And sure enough, we heard a bugle. We heard two bugles. And then Ken comes running back by me. He's like, I hear him glunking. I hear him calling. I think he's right behind me, following me. And Ken ran back behind me, and I got all set up with the bow. Again, this is another setup. We're in thick timber. So either I'm not going to see anything, or there's going to be a bull coming right down the only lane right in front of me, and I'm going to get to top pin him at 20 yards. I was excited. The camera guy was ready. We were all set up. And then we heard nothing. Nothing but a really loud, obnoxious pine squirrel. So I don't know if the bull just kind of gave up the chase. I don't know if he got spooked. I don't know what happened. And I think at that point, we all kind of came to the same realization that we were down to the wire. We had been given one last chance, and it didn't work out. So we kind of just slowly and carefully and methodically made our way back down the trail, back towards our camp. Got back to camp, had a snack or two. I think actually, no, we took our time. We had lunch there. And it was good to just kind of mentally decompress a little bit after that exciting morning. Tore down our camp. Then we had about a 3-mile hike back up to up the spine, up the horse trail to where our vehicles were originally. Maybe 3.5 miles. And on that hike, we got to talking a little bit. We started talking about work, talking about life, about other things. But at that point, I don't think we were very much in the mentality of like, maybe there's one more, maybe we can kill one more. Because it gets to a point where when you're just trying to force it, when you're just trying to push it, it's going to be frustrating. So like, you know what? We're just going to enjoy a slow hike back. Not dejected, but we're just out in the woods. We're out in the mountains. We're going to breathe in the air. We're going to enjoy the hike. And as I was hiking, I was really thinking how much, I came here to kill an elk. And I had practiced all summer. And I felt really good about my setup. And after last year getting to shoot at an elk and missing him, totally my fault. And the year before that, not even pulling my bow back, not even seeing an elk really that I could have shot at, this year was going to be my chance. And then realizing it wasn't going to happen, you kind of force yourself to think about, well, what did go right? What was successful? And it's not always about the kill. Yeah, the kill is great. But just being in the mountains with dudes who share such a common and bizarre, if you really think about it, like we're chasing this crazy animal through the mountains in a terrain that he's way more adapted to than we are. And that we're doing it the hard way, that we're on public land, backpacking with all our food and water and camping gear and bows and arrows, everything with us on our backs. Like I said, on public land, archery season, while trying to film it and self-film it in a place where you can't even attach a camera to your bow. Kind of the difficult beauty of taking it the hard way through all of this. I don't know, it kind of gives you a special appreciation. And that hike back was a good time to kind of meditate and think on this stuff for me. So we got back to the vehicles, got back to my rental. I was pleased to find that it was still there. There was actually a bunch of ice on the rental car. The whole time we were in the valley, we had seen some snow accumulating on the top of the mountain. They had told some stories of years past where people got stuck up there, and they're all laughing about it. And at the time, that's one of those things that you're like, okay, I hope that's one of those things that's funny a couple of years down the road. But right now, I'm like, yeah, I really don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to be digging my way out of the snow on a really, really steep mountain with a 2-wheel drive vehicle and no chains. But fortunately, got back. There was just a tiny bit of ice on the vehicle, nothing bad. But got back. We made our way down the hill. We went into town. There was a bit of construction on the highway, actually. So it took us a little longer to get going. And then eventually we found our way down into town and grabbed a big, juicy cheeseburger at a place called Cougar Dave's. And Cougar Dave's was named after some guy named Dave who killed more cougars than anybody else out there. I think they said he had killed, rumor has it that he had killed 1,000 cougars. Who knows if that's true? But an impressive story, and his legacy lives on in a burger joint, I guess. But man, that burger, after eating all this freeze-dried, very lean food for several days, a big, juicy cheeseburger really hit the spot. So after that, I headed back to Boise. I was able to move my flight up a little bit earlier since we got out on time. Originally, I had booked the last flight out because I was like, last day, who knows? Maybe we're still packing meat out. Maybe we get into a snowstorm. I don't know. I'm going to book the last flight available. But I was able to bump up my flight a little bit earlier. So I was just going to get a hotel room in Boise and head out early the next morning. And the hook hunting guys continued on with their adventure. So they went on to Montana for the next leg of the trip to go bow hunt bulls in a different state. And that's actually what they're doing right now while I'm recording this. So I haven't heard any updates. I've seen a couple pictures on Instagram, but I think their cell service is pretty limited. So I haven't heard a lot, but man, I hope they're into elk. I think I would have heard if they had killed one yet, but they still have several days. So hopefully they knock one down. So I am cheering for those guys and eagerly awaiting the hooked hunting series just to see what happens. So guys, this was a tough hunt. It was a real adventure for sure. Sometimes when I look back on this channel called Adventure One, I'm like, yeah, that time was just a hunt, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a part of it. But this one was for sure a real adventure, even if I never got to shoot an arrow. I never got to point my bow at anything. I think there's still some valuable takeaways here. One is take time to get into the mountains. I think that mountain air is just good for the soul. Just when you're breathing that fresh, clean air and smelling the pines, and there's just something magical about it. And every time I get up in the mountains, I'm reminded of that and how great that is. And this trip, it was originally an elk hunt, but it turned into more of a rugged backcountry hiking and adventure. And I was able to tell that story through video. So again, not the story that I was intending to tell, but that's kind of the thing about stories. A lot of times they happen to you, and then you get to tell the story that happens. You don't get to direct it and craft it and totally control of it. It's a reminder that we're small beings in a larger story. And I think when you're up in those rugged mountains, just seeing the power of the wind and the trees and the hills, that you're reminded ultimately how small you are and that you're just a small part of a larger story. And another takeaway is that this hard hunting, this early season stuff, really makes me appreciate the rifle season, the late season stuff that much more. So I really like bow hunting. I think gun stuff is what got me into hunting at first. Bow hunting, I enjoy it more, but when it's up in the mountains with a bow on public lands, in steep hills, in thick jungle, in snow and ice, those hunts that don't have all those struggles and you can still knock something down, it just makes you appreciate them instead of just getting jaded and worn out by the same repetitive thing. I know guys who all they ever do is hunt on a feeder. And I do some of that. I absolutely do some of that. Like probably every year I'm going to kill something on a feeder in late season. Nothing wrong with that. But when I do all this stuff and get my butt kicked up in the mountains and I come back and I can just knock one down, man, it makes me appreciate it that much more. And sometimes hunts like this, I mentioned earlier, I was well practiced. I was confident in my gear. After 2 years of not getting something, I felt good about it. But sometimes things just don't work out. And I'm sure in hindsight, we can analyze it. And yeah, there's some tactical decisions that we could have made a little bit better. But I don't think there were any times, other than that one bull on the trail, where I'm really doubting our decisions and I'm feeling like we messed it up. Sometimes, honestly, stuff just doesn't work out. And it's not anyone's fault, especially when you're doing it the hard way, when you're hunting on a tag that has a 10% success rate, and then you're trying to make a movie on top of that. The odds are against you, and it's going to not work out more often than it does. And you don't have to beat yourself up about it. You don't have to beat up anybody else about it. Sometimes that's just the way it is. So you got to look for the positive things. Look for the gems that you can take out of there and those little jewels that you can appreciate and enjoy. I also wish this hunt had been just a touch longer, maybe a day or two. I think beyond 6 or 7 days with camp on your back, going hard the whole time, you're going to get just worn out and you're going to start making mistakes after that. But just thinking about how we lost a half a day in the deadfalls here and we had one attempt that didn't work out here, I just found myself wishing for a little bit more time. Even though we had initially plenty of time, found myself wishing for more, or that maybe we had not messed around in that first area as much and just moved on to the area where we eventually started hearing and seeing those bulls. That's a little bit of a regret, but again, more of an analyzing in hindsight thing. Another thing that I changed up shortly before this hunt, through most of the spring and through most of the summer, I had practiced with a single pin sight. I had the Apex Gear Covert on my bow. And man, I really like that sight. It's just so precise, being able to dial to any distance and just lob one and send it. Looking at a single pin is nice and relaxing and easy. And it's just confidence inspiring is the way I would say it. And I really like that sight. But before this, Ken was telling me, he's like, oh, this terrain's a lot thicker. And so I was thinking back to Montana where it was really open. The single pin sight could have got it done. But in this thick stuff, the idea that something's going to come running in from 20 to 30 to 40 really quick, and I'm not going to have time to let down and re-range again and set up for another shot. I'm just going to have to pick another pin and send it. I switched over to the Apex Gear Magnitude multi-pin sight, just a normal 5-pin, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. That was a good call. I didn't get to use it, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I felt like I had the right equipment on my bow. I had good broadheads, those Titanium X 2-blade large game heads. I had that multi-pin sight. I had a good release. I felt like all the gear on my bow was good. I just kind of wish I got to use it. In other gear stuff, my food system was great. I feel like on a lot of backpacking trips, I bring too much food and too much clothing. When I look through my pack and I'm like, well, what didn't I use? I'm like, I have extra food and I have a spare change of clothes that I didn't touch. And I think some of that is just because I don't want to ever be at a lack. I don't want to ever like, well, I ate all my food and now I have no plan. Or I'm wearing all my clothes and I'm still cold. I never want to be at a lack. So I did have a little bit of extra, but on this trip, it actually worked out great because I was able to send some of that extra clothing back with Casey and the goats. And then the food, because there was a little mix-up with somebody not bringing all the food that was originally planned, we ended up splitting and sharing, and it all worked out. Other gear, so the QU clothes for this, it was their attack pant, and I don't remember the name of the hoodie, but it was a kind of medium weight hoodie, and then the Kutana gaiters, all the QU stuff worked out great. For the thick stuff and all the pokey logs that we were in, I would have absolutely shredded other gear. I think I got one tiny little rip in the pants, but something that just a couple stitches through it will have right back in order. for gear that's not a heavy rain jacket, not a parka, it's still being pretty good and water resistant, while comfortable, while quiet. Usually that's the kind of the trifecta. It's hard to have something that's waterproof, comfortable, and quiet. Usually you get 2 out of the 3. I was really impressed with all that stuff. My boots were an interesting story. I was using the Danner Pronghorn Boots. They're good boots. I've put a lot of miles on them, and I think I've had them for a year and a half at this point. And for me, that's about normal for doing a lot of this stuff in the mountains in Texas, where I'm kicking through rock and cactus all the time. To get a pair of boots that last more than 2 years of full season stuff is pretty rare for me. And these boots did a good job. I don't regret the Danner Pronghorns at all, but the mountains did eat them a little bit. The front of the toes started delaminating a little bit, and then I got one big chunk taken out of the EVA foam heel. So I don't know if it's just a sharp piece of granite that did that in. So I think these were good boots, but they kind of met their match in the mountains. So I've already got another pair of Danners on order. I'll definitely be using those in Texas and for some other hunts. If I do another one of these really, really rugged mountain hunts, will I do the same thing again? Will I go with something else? I don't know. So that was boots were okay, but I did beat them up pretty bad. The one piece of gear I ordered right when I got back home, I think it's always funny to think, like, you come off a trip and usually like one of your buddies or somebody has a piece of gear and you're like, ooh, that was a game changer. That was nice. I got to get me one of those. For me, I was pretty dialed most of the time. The one thing that I ordered afterwards was a little Climate seat cushion. So I have a Climate sleeping pad. It's the Static V. I think the Recon is that model. It's just the smallest, lightest one they make. But Ken actually had, it was basically the same thing, but it was a quarter of the size of the sleeping pad, and it was just a little seat cushion, because up there you're not bringing a chair with you. So if you want to sit down, either there's a log or nothing, and we're in the Rocky Mountains. It means your butt's sitting on some hard rock a lot of times. So having that little seat cushion, I could tell that was comfortable and something I would appreciate. So I did order one of those, got one on the way. And man, this hunt, just thinking back on it, I love it when I get to kill something, when I get to shoot my bow. But like I said earlier, it's not always about the kill. And sometimes even when you work hard and don't get to come home with anything, it's still okay. This hunt was a real butt kicker, but in a good way. I hope you enjoyed hearing about this adventure story, and please go watch the video on YouTube. I worked hard on it, and I was able to capture some of these beautiful mountain views that you just don't get from audio only. So please go check that out, and I'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. That just helps the channel. YouTube is actively really trying to come down on hunting content right now, and anything we can do to show support, either for me, but any other hunting content creators that you like, please give them a thumbs up, give them a comment, share their stuff. It's really important, and it really matters a lot. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.